we go, the main part of the event today. Adam Harper, Ghoulish, is going to talk through his workflow and show you how he works on a couple of new tracks, I think, but enough of me. Adam,
hello.
Take it away.
Yeah, let's go into it. So, I'm assuming everyone knows Ableton. If you don't use it, fairs, but it's best. So usually when I start a track, I always start with drums. It's kind of the way I always start my tracks because I find when I'm producing, the best way to build any sort of quote unquote pro sounding track, as that sounds, is having good samples and drums, and then from that I find it really easy just to start building from there. I mean, obviously I know a few people start from melodies. I can't do that because I'm rubbish at music theory and stuff. But yeah, so drums, just dead basic two-steppy stuff really. So yeah, really simple stuff. It's just, bit of two-step, just one kick for this one, and the reason that is, it just sounded good sometimes. Normally I put a transient layer on top of kicks, just to give it a bit more prominence in the mix, which I might show in another track. But I found with this one, because of how much the drums are doing, I didn't want too much top end, and it's really good to keep wary of just how much top end is in your drums. Because especially your kick, should I say, because I found when I put a transient in, sometimes it's too loud, even though it's clicking through the mix. You end up having basically no headroom once you start mixing and mastering things, and really having no placement for where your snares and hi-hats are going to go. So basically, when I am doing the drums, I've only really started doing this, which is kind of embarrassing to say, but I'm sure your engineering teacher will probably tell you. But when you imagine a drum kit, obviously you've got a snare there, your toms and stuff like that. With especially dance music, there's a lot of swingy drum stuff, and I might start to pan snares around. And I know it's dead ridiculous to admit I've only just started doing that, but it offers so much more space when there's quite a lot going on. So if I listen to, is it just the snares playing? So this one is to the left, that one's to the right. Again, it's dead basic stuff, but I don't know why I didn't think of it, because I was oh yeah. I remember when I got told, think of a drum kit stereo image and stuff like that. And again, it just gives you so much more freedom to start messing around with the stereo image, which I was struggling with for years. I was why is my tracks not sounding as wide? And why are they not sounding as good as other people's that I'm referencing? And it's basically just because of my stereo placement, which I found was a big part. I still struggle with it, to be honest. But yeah, and then I think the big part for me is actually my cymbal processing, which, because like I said, I struggled with stereo imaging and just getting things to sound wide, getting things to sound quote unquote I say it sounds professional because when I'm listening to people I look up to, I'm wow, that's a well pro sound. And it literally just comes from, I didn't really pan any hats on this per se because there's only a couple of things going on. But what I did do is a lot of processing on the actual drum bus. It says it's a group, but in Ableton, a group can act as a bus, essentially. And without all of it, so we'll have a look at the processing on the actual cymbal bus and then the bus, which is when I'm trying to show people it sounds ridiculous, but it sounds quite weak. I mean, I don't know if you can it's really weird for me to say because there's only one speaker here, but it doesn't sound as wide. But outside and the processing it gets wider. It starts getting wider the more you process it. So the cymbal rack is basically parallel processing. So you can do this in a bus, if you use Logic and stuff, you'd bust it out and whatnot. But what I did in Ableton is have, basically this would be a wet channel, and then this would be your dry channel. And basically on the parallel wet signal, it's just an overdrive, but really the high end's really low, but what it does, it just adds this sort of presence to the mix that you wouldn't get if you didn't have it. And then the dry signal is basically just doubling up the dry signal, which is making it louder, but it just kind of works that way, because I think for more garagey stuff, if anyone's doing it, you kind of want that rough and ready sound. And then you've got a reverb on there, which I know you probably should bust reverbs and have it all proper, compressed and stuff like that, and all the same decays and whatnot. But when I'm doing it, I kind of find it's nice just to tune it from the ear because you're not adding too much crazy stuff to it. It's just basically fuck all really. But it's it does its job. Like I say, it adds a bit of imaging. So when it comes down to there's more when you get to your synth levels and stuff like that, you're gonna have a lot more image, like space in the mids rather or the mono signal. So yeah, and then a saturator. Now this is something I've always talked about, like saturating your mix, soft clipping and stuff like that is really, really, really useful. So when I'm approaching a mix, especially, I use soft clipping for pretty much everything. So if you like clipping and stuff like that, if you clip, you're gonna hard clip and basically just square the wave off. But if you roll it off, like it's basically gain staging, or well, technically it's not gain staging, but for the sake of it, it is gain staging. It's basically rolling off like the really, really harshness of it, and you're gonna get like a lot more headroom, which you can show. So with it on, I'll look at the math. So it's like there, and then soft clip it. It's louder, but it's not clipping. And that way you're gonna get like a louder mix and stuff like that. And then this one was just a personal preference, was just frequency shifting, just giving it a little bit more grit, that is. And I find that's a really useful thing on like sort of more houseier tracks as well on these cymbals. But I'll play around, I suppose. And bit of compression, just to glue it all together. I'm not gonna lie, again, after like nearly 10 years of producing, I've only really discovered what a compressor does in the last like 2, which is kind of embarrassing, but I think it's one of them things like where you're like, what the hell does it actually do? But then you start realizing it's really, really simple. And all it is to do is just get like a really loud signal. So I've got like really loud hats, like the offbeat one, like I've got like little clicky texture as well. It's all a bit jarring and a bit too much. And again, coming down to like headroom stuff. Put it down, you're going to squash it all together, and when you start mixing, and you see more soft clipping in a bit, it's going to just give you some more space to boost it later. Because I go for this bit later down the line, but when I'm mastering my stuff, I go for like -6 LUFS, which is just I find it sounds really good. And I've rolled off the high end a bit. I've talked about this before. I know it's for me anyway. Like this is just personal. The tracks that were sounding pretty bad for my end was the stuff that wasn't having like this really like harsh upper end, because rolling it off thinking, oh, I don't need it. But you really do if you want to get like that sort of clean, pristine sound. I mean, if you go with like an old school sound, roll it off, but I wasn't. And I was like, oh, I really want this like sort of like modern production sound, which is like, I find like a lot of like breaksier stuff is really apparent. And it's literally just rolling the low end off, high end off, but I've stopped doing it as much. So like, I used to do like that. I don't do that anymore. Again, just the same. I don't do it as harsh as I used to. It's like in increments, so it's sort of staging it a bit. And then yeah, you probably want to, TS just means transient shaping, so I use that on absolutely everything to do with cymbals and snares and stuff. And sometimes a kick, if it needs a bit of punch, it's like 20 quid to get. It's like the best plugin I use. And most of the stuff I use is Ableton stock, which is again a bit embarrassing, but it works. So yeah. And then yeah, like I say, that's sort of like the cymbals, and that was the big part for me. Well, I started processing a bit more to start getting like my track sounding wider, because I always thought my track sounded like really thin and weak, and I started like discovering like, oh yeah, I can make things wider by just adding reverbs, processing the stereo image rather than just processing the mono image, and it just made the world of difference. And then again, that's going for like a group, which is like it's probably not a bus, but I basically use it as a bus, and then that's just my this is just a little bit more of the soft clipping. So what I'll do is just drive it and then roll it off a bit, and that just, it doesn't change the volume, but it just like again rolls off the signal. So when it comes to like pushing everything through a limiter, you're going to get a lot more headroom. So if it didn't do that, I could probably get to like a way less thing. Because imagine like the transits going like that, like really, really loud. You roll it off, it gets really small, and then you can push it through like a limiter and get way more like loudness out of it. And that's usually what I do for mastering, but we'll come to that in a minute. My mastering's bastardized, so probably don't take it for word, but that's what I do. And then, like I say, most of my tracks are built from drums. That's why it looks like quite a small project. Because I find like, especially for this music I do, it's more percussive and bass heavy. So when it comes to like the mid-range stuff, like the chords and like the actual build of the tracks is really, really simple. And I usually have melodies coming from like vocal samples or just like a really like easy, like atmospheric pad. So we can have a little look at that. So I've got like this little droney thing, which sounds sort of out of key, which I think it is, but when you add it all together, it just adds like this really nice texture. And again, going back to like the stereo image, adding a bit of width on the utility module, just again to make it all a bit wider, because again, that to me is just what makes tracks sound, like from good tracks make it sound amazing. And then auto pan as well, again, that's just going to be going from left to right, very, very slowly, like at a 0.05 hertz rate, so barely noticeable, but like if you look at like the little meter there, you can see that it is just doing it a little bit. Nothing's like too crazy, but when everything starts coming together, it's just not going to be as messy. And then again, like I say, my sort of stuff is super atmospheric, especially in this track. And again, it's just a really, really simple pad from Contact, this. I tell you what's really good about Contact actually is like all these like little things. When I started using Contact, I hated it, and that was like a year ago. And I've started to really realise like all the processing that they do on like sound effects and stuff like that or pads, you should start using that yourself. So like if it's got like a lot of reverb and stuff, it's like why has it got reverb on it? It's going to make it sound wider. And again, I'll always bring back to that because I was struggling with getting the mixes sounding like that. So that's when I started referencing like presets and stuff, which I think people like say, oh, I don't use presets. Presets are really good if you can't be our sound designing like me sometimes. But for the most part, yeah, just a pad with this again, sort of out of key, but adds a bit of texture to it. And then I've got a phaser on there, which again is just moving it slightly from left to right just to give it a bit more imaging, because the main bulk of this track has a vocal chop in it, which is from a really old over mono tune, which I think is from an old jungle tune, but I can't remember which one. So when you start like layering it all together, it's... So this part probably should fade in, like I say, it's still in demo stage. So we took it out. I say it's out of key, but just has that sort of weird texture to it. And because my stuff is so atmospheric, if you're doing like sort of, especially like dubstep and maybe like drum and bass as well, it's really good to like build textures up. So if you've seen this one, like just a really low droning texture, and then with the cymbals, I've got like a glitch. It's just panning around. And all these sort of things is like what starts building up the palette, because I don't know what it is about my brain, but if there's like no background sound, I hate how my tracks sound. So like I start basically just building textures up through that, and again, using the stereo image and stereo field just to really, add a bit more to the track, a bit more depth. And yeah, like I said, my instrumentation is super, super simple. Like I literally just made a little, that's about as musical as this track gets really. If you have a loop, it is just, it's a preset in modular, which is from Arturia. Just doing that chord, dead simple like. But I find like, for the sort of music I do, which is like more club centric, it's quite nice just to have these really, really basic things and build on them. So an LFO going to, I'm assuming, where did I go into? I don't know where I was going to. Let's have a look. I don't think it's going nowhere, so the LFO is too cool. But then like I use guitar rig quite religiously actually, and I'm going to try and find another track that I think started a couple of days ago. I just use all the presets in this, and it's basically just a secret weapon for making boring stuff like pads sound. Sound really cool. And, and just stuff like that, which I find makes the track more interesting. Because like I say, with club music especially, it's always going to be a bit more repetitive than stuff that you're going to like proper compose and whatnot. And like I say, a bit more stereo imaging stuff just to give more space, because I'll show you in a minute, we've got a load of bass heavy stuff going on, which is like the whole premise of the track, the drums and the bass. And the filtering this is more used for compositional reasons. So like when it comes to like, the build-ups and all that stuff, you just whack it on and get the crowd going crazy, I suppose. But it's about play. It's not playing, but yeah, you get the idea. It just kind of filters up, and so it gives more space for other things. And that's a big thing as well. Like when you're doing tracks to make them, if it's like a really repetitive track, like a techno tune, you want little things just to change, like filtering, like with an LFO and stuff. Really, really useful just to give progression. Because like I say, this track looks really, really simple, because it is. But what makes people not get bored of it, because I've not put it out or anything like that, I've been sending out demos to labels, you don't get bored of it because there's like so much progression and just like minor changes where it's like, oh right, that's changed and stuff. But I think really the meat and potato of my stuff is the bass design. And because this is like sort of an older school track, I'm using older sounds. So this is a Respace. I can't remember where I got it from, but there is a load of like sample packs out there, which I can pull up a few, which are like just like really old ones. So the classic one's the Blue Mars Jungle one, which is just like, yeah, I think everyone and the mum's got this, but it is not really old school stuff, and you just like layer that up with the sounds you're going to be using just to give that sort of that sound. Like I remember I was speaking to like Interplanetary Criminal, who does a lot of garage, and he basically just rips sounds off records just to give it that old school sound, really. And this is no different. This was a really old school like Reese. Take everything off it. Just in a sampler, just getting looped a bit, and luckily it was already C3 when you do sampling stuff. You want obviously. So it's just stuff like that, and I know if you try and get that like older school sound with especially like garage, you're just going to be basically ripping things off records or using really simple sound design. And it's just getting compressed, really simple, rolling off the low end, and then I think it's just going through like another dry wet thing, which I use these quite a lot. These dry wet racks. That's hard to say that. And it just gives it a bit more space again. And then like in conjunction with the, like I said, the Vox is sampled, it all works quite well together, because that's, if you hear the Vox on its own, it's got like a really old Reese in it. And you put the Reese just to give it a bit of. So yeah, that's sort of like what I do for a lot of the sounds, like just use like, especially for Reese's, unless I'm going to make my own, which I'll show that in a minute. But yeah, it's just kind of simple, like when I'm doing build-up stuff, just to like layer older school sounds, because I really like I say, the callbacks like post-dubstep, garage, jungle and stuff. It's really nice. But then when I get into sound design, and this is the part where everyone's like, oh, it's going to be dead complex. It's really not. I like used to overthink sound design loads, and what I ended up finding out was that all you literally just need like sine waves and just basically all your basic shapes and stuff like that. So that's without processing. Nice. And that's with processing. So it's a pretty simple sound. So let's break it down from the start. And this is where like I used to struggle loads with sound design. I used to be like, oh my god, it's so hard. How do people get these sounds? And like I say, it's just subby stuff. So this is basically like the idea of what a Respace would be made like, but with sines. 2 sine waves, 2 octaves down, a bit of filter movement, like really simple stuff. Like I think the other thing that's different about this is I've put like the higher you go, the faster it plays. But pretty minor. Anyway, and that's literally for most of garage, most of like the more minimal UK dance music is you could just be doing stuff like that. Obviously you can complicate it, but for my sort of sound and style, I quite like how minimalistic these like sort of sounds are. And then breaking down into like processing, most of the music, like I say, is sub-centric and drum-centric. So when you're actually doing these, it's just like a texture for the sub. So you just start end up like rolling off like lots of your low end, like you can see here, and it's basically having like your low mids present, because that's what's going to cut from like more like your phones and stuff. And then it's just compressing that with probably the most overused thing ever, OTT. And again, it's just this all is just to make it like an even sound, because I remember when I didn't compress it, when it started going upper, I know it was just getting a bit weird. It was going too high, so when I tried to master it, like when you push something too much, like everything squishes together and it sounds dreadful. That's what's happening. So that's the reason just for compressing it a bit here and then compressing it again. And then chorus again, using this. I won't show by, but like basically using things for your stereo image when it's not low end or you want it to be mono is like the most important thing to make your mixes sound, well, more quote unquote professional. Again, I hate kind of saying that, but you put that on and it's just going to like widen the sound once start rolling off the low end again, which is what these next ones are doing. And it's just going to give like so much more presence when like you listen on like your phones and stuff like that, or if you're in a club, like the sub bass is going to hit you, but then that's going to be actually heard like on both stereo speakers. So that's the idea of that. Again, that's just shaping it, and then these are just It's doing the same thing. Just taking out the resonant frequencies, because when you start going up, like that low mids, at low end, low mids, you're gonna get loads of resonance and it just basically messes with your sub. So, that, like I say, really, really simple stuff, but then when you pair it with a sub bass, really simple again, sine waves and a triangle wave giving some like distortion and whatnot. But when you're pairing these together, you've got to be really careful of, like, say, these resonant frequencies. So I think it is this one. When you've like working with bass stuff, you see all these are all your fundamentals. And basically, when like you've got like a low like bassy sound, like the synth and the sub, and you got like really harsh fundamentals, you get loads of clashing. And what's going to happen is when you put it in a club, it's going to sound like absolute shit, and you get loads of muddiness, and yeah, it's just going to sound rubbish. So you take it off. Sounds like. So that's what all these EQ stuff for, and it's like just to basically soften out. Really, really simple stuff. It's not like rocket science, really. It's just stuff like when I first started producing, I used to overthink it too much. Like I was making bass, like, oh my God, I must do so much. And all it is about is just being a bit more careful on that sort of thing. And again, sub, super easy, there's no movement on that, so that's why it's quite a clean sounding tune. So yeah, and then like I said, I've talked about texture and just keeping that stereo image like quite wide. I've got a bit more texture with this like old thing, and when you start pairing it, probably best more in the intro, pairing it with all that little texture and stuff, it just like gives a bit more character to your tunes. Again, it's such a generic thing, because like, you know, like lo-fi hip hop does it a load, but I think in dance music it gets a bit abandoned because people want like really, really clean sounds especially, but I think when you start utilising like glitchy stuff and all that goodness, you just get like such a nice character to it. So if I just play the, you won't hear it that much, it's just like really subtle. And then if you're wondering what the transient shape is doing, it's just basically this hi-hat was just going a bit crazy, so just turn the transient shaper off to stop the transient going mental. But we'll talk about the mix properly in a second. So yeah, that's like a big part of like the sound that I go for anyway, like sort of like gritty, like dystopian garage, I suppose. As that sounds, but it's a big part of my production, because if I don't do that, like I say, the tracks just stress me out. And then like basically like using loads of like dubby echoes and stuff like that. So if you know what a dub echo is, I wish I had like an analog one, but they're great just to like add a bit more texture to your tunes, like panning around as well. And these are sort of things that I just basically utilise to build up a whole track, and then paired with lots of vocal chopping to build up more atmosphere and stuff is basically the bare bones of all my tunes. Because like I said, I don't, unless it was like on my EP which I put out, which I don't have the projects to, that was quite melodic, but the stuff that I really focus on is like the more bassy and minimalistic side of things. And again, like with the vocals, when it comes to drop, the best thing to do is not just like loop them, because you can get a bit boring. I used to be a nightmare for it. I used to be an absolute nightmare for boring like drops, because you know you just fall into the track of just like looping a vocal, like having that going like that. But what I ended up doing for this was like my Secret Weapons guitar rig, and that's like my secret effects. Right, let's pull these off 2 secs. So this is just again talking about like giving things more space and character, because that's what I found was making the track prior a bit lackluster. And it's just like, again, shaping the sounds of EQ. I didn't use the chorus that I usually use. Having some like really nice reverbs and stuff, and movement on the filters, just to, it's not doing the same thing as we drop it. You do that top end, it's just giving that sort of nice thing, and when you listen on the stereo stuff, it's going around and around, and it's just quite nice. Then, nice bit of reverb and stuff. Another chorus, that was actually on, and an echo, just, again, give it a bit more, you know, character, because this is what I say, like with bass music, you can get really repetitive, and techno, if you ever do, everyone does techno, it's very repetitive, like 7 minutes, and you want stuff that's just going to like play with the stereo feel just to give it a bit of character. And again, just shaping stuff, taking resonances out, all that sort of stuff. But I think probably the most important part is when like you're approaching a mix down, which is sort of my whole thing with a track. So like I say, I start with the drums because that's like the foundation for a track. So if the drums weren't good, the whole track would just fall apart. You could have like the best sounds I know, but if the drums and stuff are not hitting, it's not good. And to be honest, drums for the most part are the easiest to do because it's just good sample selection. That's the kick I've made. But I think for the most part, this is just like samples from Splice or like little sample packs I've just come across, or Ableton own packs because I love them. And basically when I'm approaching the drums, like I said, it's mixing it like it's an actual drum kit. So you've got hi-hat shot really, really like wide, and then snares hitting down the middle unless like the fill ones, and your kick hitting down the middle, but sometimes, depending on the music, you've got like a high end on the kick, giving it more space, which I've done in another track, which I'm probably going to pull up in a second because I think that's got a lot more stuff on that side of things. And yeah, and it's all about balancing. So I use this little plug-in here, if it's going to pop up, this. I don't know if anyone DJs, but if you use Recordbox, same waveform. And this has really helped me because I live in a flat with like big ceilings and it's dead echoer. It allows me to dial things in. And I know when things are sitting right is because of the way the waveform's looking. So with like bass music and stuff, you kind of want this like sort of like predominantly red and purple thing. That's how I know I've mixed it right. And that's all just most of me balancing. There's nothing, like I said, I wish I could say there's loads of crazy stuff going on. It's literally not. It's just basically me EQing things to sit better in the mix, or putting things in the stereo image to get a bit wider and be a bit more prominent in the mix. And basically reference it via this little meter. So the drums are the big one for me. So I always want my kick and snare being like same sort of volume really. Well, same like sort of volume on there, not technically. And it's that's just so when it's in the club or I'm DJing it, you've got like really nice, clear like transients because that's what you're gonna be mixing on, or that's what's gonna like, you know, translate on the big system. And this is something that I'll say, like I discovered recently about cymbal mixing, is you do want this harshness to it a little bit, not like piercing harshness, but when I used to mix, my cymbals used to be like a yellow color, which means it's a bit more high end, but I was cutting a lot of the low end off. So what I ended up doing is boosting the low end and then also boosting the high end now. And what it does is just give this like really fat cymbal sound, and that's, to me, what I was always missing in tracks, like this really wide sort of low, like high mids and like your top end. And it just makes a world of difference when it comes to like space and when you start mixing stuff down, which to me is the most important thing about producing. And yeah, and then like when I do mastering and approaching stuff, I say I do buses for everything. Well, these are technically buses, the group's in Ableton, but you can bus things, but this is just a lot easier to do. And it's just to basically compress things together. So the kick's always separate, and I have a filter which has like an imager on it again. About it. You probably won't notice it too much, but the top end is getting, it's like all this is just getting like super, super wide. And then like that's like basically getting, again with all these other buses that I showed before, you've got like compression and a bit of like soft clipping on it. And it basically just gels everything together and allows it all to be like in context rather than things being too loud. And I found my tracks previously, the kicks were far too loud and it just basically blew out like the subs. And it just kind of, when like you listen to a track, you want everything to like sort of gel together. My stuff didn't used to do that, and it was just because I didn't approach mixing like this. It's pretty, like I say, it's nothing like revolutionary, it's pretty rudimentary stuff, but it makes a world of difference to me. And then ever since like sort of approaching mixing as like bus mixing and stuff, it's just made more sense to me. So like I'll mix my drums together, like, you know, I'll have like a master bus for the drums, or like sort of an EQ and stuff like that. And then my instruments, not too much on there, because like I say, I don't know how to do music theory, but we don't talk about that. And it all gets either compressed together, in this case it's just side-chained, because a lot of it was just pretty minimalistic stuff. But when I'm doing like my synths and whatnot, usually, which I'm going to pull a track up in a second where I've done it, they all get compressed together. Because again, you want to process them together, you want them to be stuck together when it's like coming down to, like you say, mixing. And that's it really. It's like I don't try to approach music like too complex. I think a lot of people, especially myself, I used to really, really overcomplicate things, but the reality is, to get a good sound, you want to just build off like a good like premise of like your drums and your samples or whatever you're doing. And if you're sound designing or whatnot, choose decent presets or sound design decently yourself. And it's always really, really simple stuff, and then made unique by like what you process it with and whatnot. And then mastering. So I have like 2 masters. I actually have a master like bus, and I have a master on the channel, on the actual real master, which is confusing, but it works in my head. And all this is doing, this little compressor, is gluing absolutely everything together. So if you see the threshold there, you get a slight bit of gain reduction when the snare hits, and it's just a really, really like easy compressor. So if you want like snappy drums, the best thing to do is put a big attack and a quick release, so the tran's just getting boosted. And the reason I did that for this was just because the snare was a bit too in your face. So when you start gluing it down, a slight bit like, you know, really, really easy ratio if you look there. It's just catching it. So if you look at that there, when it drops down, the gain reduction is just literally pulling down a slight transient, just to give it that like bit more tightness in the mix. And then again, a bit of a master EQ, just bringing down some resonance down here. You see we've got like a load of power here, and then just a bit of, and I don't know if you guys use Pro Q. If you do, it's amazing. If you don't, I recommend getting it. There's a really cool thing you can do. It's making dynamic like EQ curves. And it's really good when you don't want to actually affect it normally, but if there's like, again, a point where frequency gets past a certain threshold, it can dip it. And it's just controlling that like quite harsh, which is like 8K. Which you do kind of usually want in like your hi-hats, but in your master you don't, because it sounds like. And then again, on the actual master, so it's like, imagine it's like gain stage in this, you're going to go through a compressor and like another slight compressor. You've got this one here. And what I was doing, this is by looks at bringing the kick down, because I noticed again that was not coming out a bit, but when I turned it down in the mix, it wasn't working, so I compressed it and it actually ended up gelling it together. But I will show you everything once it's all off, just to give like a bit of an A/B. Because yeah, like I say, it's nothing like, I wish I could say like, oh, there's loads of like dead, complex, mad stuff that I'm doing. It's not, it's just stuff that I was an idiot and didn't realise you should do for a while, but. So, yeah. And then you put like the first master on, just gluing it, and then the final master is your compressor then. And most of this is just limiting, which we'll get into in a second, because like I say, I've got a bit of a weird way of mastering. So, I'll pull everything off real quick. So the first one is just a limiter. Everyone on my mum uses this because it's just that easy to master. Like I say, if you've got a good mix down, you can run it through a pretty good limiter, get a lot of loudness out of it, which you're not supposed to do, but if you don't want to pay for a mastering engineer, do this, sounds all right. And all I do is just bring the threshold down and bring it up, so turn it on. So I just bring it up a little bit, and then going into Pro L, which is another limiter, just giving it a bit more, another boost, just to give that final bit of fatness. And again, not the way you're supposed to master, but it does work. And these are just stuff that I use to meter. So, a little imager. And this thing, like I say, I usually aim for about -7, -6 on here, and then on my loudness meter. Same again, just because it's competitive loudness, quote unquote. But if you're doing like DMB and like American dubstep, don't listen to any of this. Just basically redline and soft cut the fuck out of everything. And that's how you're gonna get loudness. So that's that one. But I've got another track that I want to show because where is it? I think I've literally started this a couple of days ago, and there's a few things that I was starting to notice that I was putting into my workflow, which I wasn't previously doing. If I can find it. The thing is, I don't name any of my projects properly, as you can see. Let's find it. Where is it? This one. But yeah, like, I wish there was like an actual science to it, but there's not. It's sort of like trial and error. And if like you're doing something like not garage or you're doing something different, it's a bit of a different workflow. But I found like when I'm like mixing bands or anything like that, which is pretty rare, but I do tend to sometimes help my mates. Same sort of process, literally just getting things and just sort of carving out with EQs. If it sounds like muddy, just bring down like certain frequencies. But yeah, I think this has got a bit more of what's in on here. So this is like super demo-ware. But again, I just wanted to show you because I I tend to sort of do the same thing for every project. I don't have a template. This is just literally how it always ends up falling. But yeah, I think, was it this one or was it another one? But basically what I'm trying to show you is how putting vocals in a track. Because I'm not, I do like vocal sampling for melodies because like I said, I'm pretty rubbish at writing melodies, so I rely on sampling. But this one, I'm actually just trying to get it cleared. That's why I wanted to show it. But yeah, hopefully it showed you something because I always feel like I'm not showing you anything. But yeah, so this is like another one that I've got. This is like another UK funky one.
Man, just skewing her tongue, that's skewing her face, that's skewing her breast. She make up as her next. Like ooh, like ooh, like ooh.
And it's just like, it's sort of a similar process, like I say, I always have this. But when I was doing these drums and whatnot, so it's probably like going to more like live percussive music, I do layer loads of like snares, like so. Usually, these are like live snares along with some more live stuff, like cymbally stuff. It's just to show that I basically do everything the same. There's no like, again, I don't like overcomplicate things because when I used to produce, I used to always think like, oh, I've got to, you know, blow my brains out with like really, really complex things when you don't. Like again, same sort of mastering thing and then limited compression there. But yeah, I'll probably show you the other track. Sorry, I'm just like going back and forth now. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions about the track, just feel free, by the way, because I'll try my best to answer. Yeah. So yeah, I can't actually get to show you the track. So oh yeah, I'm showing you all this, but you've not actually heard the track properly in context. But I'll skip it on a bit so I don't bore you. So you kind of get the idea. Probably something that I'm probably not really talked about is actually like structuring tracks and stuff. So obviously it's like the standard like 8-bar stuff. But what I find most interesting when I'm talking about writing is how I make tracks like more interesting. Because like I say, if you don't listen to dance music, that's probably boring as fuck for you. I'm sorry. But like when you're DJing and stuff, if you want like little cues and stuff like that. And usually what I do for that is it's all about the drums. So like every 8 bars, you hear like a little break come in. And then also from that, which when I listen to like other people's music, so if everyone's like familiar like over mono and stuff like that, they use like loads of little tiny things like just, you know, like these every couple of bars and like just interesting things with the vocals or like the drums just to make it a bit more not boring for you. And again, if you're a DJ or anything, it's really helpful because you know when to like mix something so you get that. you know, like you mix out and stuff like that. But I say most of my tracks are built off percussion and bass. I do keep most of my things simple because I found like when you start overcomplicating like the more compositional side of things, it just kind of becomes a bit of a mess. So just like any sort of like your favourite more dancier tracks, I suppose, they follow quite a chill thing unless someone like Floating Points who's just like batshit crazy. It's just because, yeah, like you kind of want a basic idea. I think it was Deadmau5 said like most people write the whole track within 16 bars and it's just sort of like spreading like elements out. So when I started this, it was just a little bit of drums, a little bit of a pad, and just building it. Sort of teasing different elements. And just, yeah, like, I tell you what, all the I started was just from the drums and then the little. And that's what it was. I remember I was like trying to do loads of different crazy stuff. I was trying to like make like a proper respace with like band rejects and just loads of automation. Just didn't work. Stripped it all back. And it happened. And I did the same thing last night. I had a track that I was working on for a few months. And I was like, doesn't sound right, this. Doesn't sound right. Just stripped it back. It was just over complex. And it's something that I've just started to really cherish. And the sort of, like my sort of stuff that I love is like sort of like early dubstep. And that was just the same. Really, really stripped back stuff. You're like, wow, it's going to be dead complex. And it's not. And that to me is like a really, really strong songwriting tool. Is basically make all the things that you want to be the main part of the track really, really simple, but then layer it up with other simple ideas and you'll end up with something that is not complex, but sounds pretty decent from what I've heard anyway, when I've been doing this. But yeah, that is pretty much that, really. Unless anyone wants me to go through anything. It's kind of like tricky to talk about, like when I'm like just looking at a screen going, oh yeah, this is my track.
What's your approach to sidechaining, like particularly?
Oh, yeah, that's actually a good thing. So when I sidechain, that's actually a good question that because I didn't even talk about it. Basically, when I sidechain, I don't typically go for a kick. So like people like will just sidechain from like the kick drum or the snare drum, whatever. But I have a little instrument, which it's just a click that is basically going near redlining, and it's just I put it on where the kick is. Depending on what sort of music you want to put it on the snare too, but for this sort of stuff, the snare doesn't need to be like in your face massively. So you listen to just the kick and that just follows it. And basically what I'll do is I use a compressor just to basically take that signal and just mimic a sidechain. So if we go to, this would be the best one for it. It's just if you have a look. So when I'm sidechaining kick, I always mainly sidechain the kick unless like you're like doing like again the more sort of like heavier bass music, you want to sidechain the snare then too. But it's literally just a case of sidechain everything to the kick for me. The other thing I probably wouldn't sidechain is vocals. But the reason I do it like this is because you get a lot more like snappiness. Because if you do it just to the kick, it sometimes follows the actual waveform shape. So I imagine a kick goes like a bit of a tail, it can be a bit long, you know, when you get that preciseness. And that to me is like how I get that sort of nice balance between the kick and sub, which is hang about. So it's like slightly ducking, but it's really quick. You're still getting like a nice fast kick, but then like, yeah, the sub's still subbing, I suppose. Yeah. Anything else?
I've got one.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for picking drum samples that work well together?
It's a tricky one really because you can kind of make things work together, just like it's like an amalgamation. But what I find is once you start like producing for a long time, you start like basically developing like your knowledge and like how good sample selection basically. It kind of comes like naturally, but I find you can sort of throw things at the wall and they stick sometimes. Like that drum sample, the break one, I remember it was shit. And I was like, that kind of sounds shit, but it's a really good shit. And that's fine. Like I use a load of glitchy effects that technically shit. That's how I listen to this without it. Like I don't think it was that great. It's just like a. Let's turn everything off 2 secs. It was just like this sort of. It's on and like sometimes you just find it. Oh yeah, you just have a mess with it. There's like again, it's sort of trial and error. It's a bit rubbish. Then you start messing around with it. It's like, oh, I sound that. That's kind of what I'll do. I wish it was like, go, yeah, there's definitely a way it does not. Just sort of like throw things at the wall. Sometimes it works, sometimes like, oh, shit, it doesn't, and you kind of just,
I guess, do you have any kind of
go-to samples where you've kind of used it in a lot of tracks and you're like, this is still somehow working?
Yeah. I've got like a little folder here, just samples. It's just like, so like stuff that goes like this is like a big one to use. That too. Go-to kick. I mean, stuff like that I'd build a track upon because it's really good to go to. And I don't think there's anything wrong with using maybe like a good kick, you know, because no one's going to be like, oh, you've used the same kick, that's, oh, what's going on there? No one really gives a shit, to be honest. But it's good to like lay that up with different samples. But I do say like as well, what's really nice, if you have like a go-to like little bank to make ideas really quickly and then just like swap things out. So like what I'll do is say if I've made a track, like the one that I showed you, I actually started like 3 projects from that. I just swapping things out, and it was a really nice thing to do. But with Ableton, I don't know what you use, but Ableton's really quick. You can just like sort of click onto the sample, show in Finder, or show in Finder, and you can just like replace. Oh, might take off. And you can basically like click this, and you can swap it out for anything in your library. So it's really quick, and that's how I sort of navigate, trying to like do a bit more uniqueness. But going back to your question about the automation, yeah, this is the track that's got an absolute load of automation, especially on the vocal. So the vocal is just a, where is it?
Big up all of the original load, boy, the original load, boy.
So it's like loads of things moving around to get that. Like how I'd use automation, basically just to like progress a track. And there's a few things I think going on in here with automation. Have a look. Like I say, when I write tunes to go a bit mental, but again, automation just going on there. I wish I could remember which track there was. Basically, I've got a track with like, it's all just automation just to make it all, but I can't remember where it is. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I use automation for songwriting and for progression reasons. Thank you. Any other questions?
Can we hear a bit more of that?
Yeah, sure.
Big up all of the original load, boy, the machine, the original load, boy, the load,
Yeah, that's that track.
Very good.
A full one.
Right, should we wrap up there then? Adam?
Yeah, fine. Any more questions?
Patrick, thank you. Well done.
Hold on a
Thanks
minute.
very much, mate.
Go on.
Staying here and dance away all afternoon now.